Imagine sitting on a first-class flight, and a passenger insults one of the most famous people in the world, Taylor Swift. But what she does next not only stuns everyone on board, it leaves them in tears. Why did her unexpected reaction change the entire mood of the flight? Stay tuned to find out, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. The first-class cabin of a luxury airline was calm, with passengers settling into their plush seats for the long-haul flight. Among them sat Taylor Swift, casually dressed in a cozy sweater and jeans, her hair tied back, and a book resting on her lap. She looked relaxed, sipping a cup of tea, blending into the setting despite her global fame. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man with a sharp tone and a loud voice was scrolling through his phone, clearly annoyed about something. The cabin crew approached him to ensure he was comfortable, but his dismissive gestures made it clear he wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. As the flight attendants began preparing for takeoff, the man suddenly looked over at Taylor and scoffed loudly. "Oh, look who we have here," he muttered just loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. Heads turned as he continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "Must be nice to pretend to be just like us while sitting here with all your millions." Taylor, caught off guard, glanced up from her book, her expression a mix of surprise and calm restraint. She didn't respond immediately, instead offering the man a small, polite smile, before returning her focus to the pages in her hands. The man, seemingly emboldened by her silence, continued. "I guess it's easy to write songs when you've got everything handed to you on a silver platter," he added with a mocking laugh, as passengers began whispering among themselves. Taylor shifted slightly in her seat, her face remaining composed, though her grip on the book tightened ever so slightly. She caught the sympathetic glances of the passengers nearby, but chose to remain silent, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the man's hostility. A flight attendant approached cautiously, sensing the growing tension. "Sir, is everything all right?" she asked with a professional smile. The man waved her off. "Everything's fine," he said dismissively. "Just making an observation about how some people pretend to be relatable." Taylor finally closed her book, placing it gently on the tray table in front of her. She looked at the man, her gaze steady but kind. "If you have something you'd like to say to me directly, I'm happy to listen," she said, her voice calm and composed, instantly silencing the whispers around the cabin. The man froze for a moment, caught off guard by her poised response. The passengers around them watched intently, waiting to see what would happen next. The cabin fell silent as Taylor's calm but firm words hung in the air. The man's smug expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, leaning back in his seat with a dismissive shrug. "Oh, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," he said, though his voice lacked the confidence it carried moments ago. Taylor took a deep breath, her calm exterior unwavering as she chose her words carefully. "You know," she began, her voice steady yet warm, "it's easy to make assumptions about people when you don't know their story." Her eyes met his, not with anger but with quiet sincerity. The man smirked, crossing his arms. "Oh, please. What story? You've had it easy. Fame, fortune, private jets. It's not like you've ever had to struggle like the rest of us." Taylor tilted her head slightly, her expression softening. "I understand why you might think that," she said. "But the truth is, we all have struggles, even if they don't look the same. And sometimes it's the struggles you don't see that shape a person the most." The passengers nearby exchanged glances, the tension in the air slowly giving way to curiosity. Even the flight attendants, who had been hovering nearby, paused to listen. Taylor continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "When I was younger, my family gave up a lot to help me chase my dreams. My parents sold our home so we could move closer to the opportunities I needed. And even now, no matter how much success I've found, I still face challenges, just like anyone else. Challenges that money or fame can't solve." The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his bravado starting to crumble under the weight of her words. Yeah, but, he began, but his voice trailed off, as if he couldn't quite find the argument he was looking for. Taylor smiled gently, her tone as kind as ever. I'm not here to convince you of anything, she said. But I believe in treating everyone with kindness, no matter where they're coming from. Because at the end of the day, we're all human, and we all deserve a little grace. The cabin remained silent, the passengers captivated not just by Taylor's words, but by the grace with which she handled the situation. The man looked away, his expression a mix of discomfort and quiet reflection. Taylor picked up her book again, her face calm and composed as though nothing unusual had happened. But for the rest of the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted. There was a newfound respect for her, not as a celebrity, but as a person who carried herself with dignity and empathy in the face of hostility. The flight continued in relative quiet, but the mood in the first-class cabin had undeniably shifted. Taylor Swift returned to her book, her expression serene, while the man who had insulted her sat in awkward silence, occasionally glancing in her direction. The other passengers, still processing the exchange, stole glances at Taylor, their admiration for her growing. About an hour into the flight, the man suddenly stood up and walked toward the restroom, leaving his seat empty. Taylor glanced at his vacant seat, her brow furrowing slightly as though deep in thought. Setting her book down, she reached for her carry-on bag, pulling out a small notepad and pen. Taylor began writing, her pen gliding across the paper with quiet determination. The passengers closest to her watched curiously, unsure of what she was doing but captivated nonetheless. When the man returned to his seat, she folded the piece of paper neatly and tucked it into her hand. Moments later, Taylor stood up and made her way toward him. The cabin fell silent as everyone watched her approach, their curiosity piqued. The man looked up, surprised to see her standing next to him. Taylor offered him a warm but resolute smile. I hope you'll read this, she said, gently placing the folded note on the tray table in front of him. And I hope it helps you understand where I'm coming from. The man stared at the note, clearly caught off guard by her gesture. You didn't have to do that, he muttered, his voice softer than before. I know, Taylor replied, her tone kind, yet firm. But I wanted to. She returned to her seat, leaving the man staring at the note in his hands. The other passengers exchanged hushed whispers, wondering what she could have written. Slowly the man unfolded the note, his eyes scanning the words. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to something much deeper, regret and humility. He lowered the note onto his lap, his hands trembling slightly as he stared out the window. The atmosphere in the cabin grew heavy with emotion, as though everyone present could feel the weight of whatever Taylor had written. One passenger leaned over to another and whispered, "What do you think it said?" The other simply shook their head, their eyes fixed on the man, who now seemed lost in thought. Taylor, meanwhile, returned to her book, her face calm but introspective. Whatever she had written, it wasn't meant to draw attention to herself. It was meant to leave an impact, one that was already beginning to take root. The flight was nearing its end, and the cabin had settled into a reflective quiet. The man who had insulted Taylor Swift sat motionless in his seat, the folded note now clutched in his hands. His eyes were glassy, as though he were replaying her words and the ones she had written to him. Passengers nearby stole glances, curious but unsure if they should say anything. Finally, he stood up, taking a deep breath before making his way toward Taylor's seat. The passengers watched in stunned silence, anticipation thick in the air. Taylor looked up as he approached, her expression open and calm. I owe you an apology, he began, his voice low but sincere. What I said earlier, it wasn't right. I judged you without knowing anything about you. And after reading what you wrote, he paused, struggling to find the words. I realized I was wrong, not just about you but about a lot of things. Taylor smiled gently, her kindness unwavering. It takes a lot to admit when you're wrong, she said. Thank you for saying that. I hope it helps you see that we all have more in common than we realize." He nodded, his face filled with humility. "Your note really hit me. You said something about kindness being a choice we make every day, no matter what we're going through. I guess I haven't been making that choice for a long time." Taylor placed a hand on the armrest of her seat, her voice soft but resolute. "It's never too late to start," she said. The man nodded again, his lips curving into a faint, almost bittersweet smile. "Thank you. For everything." As he returned to his seat, the cabin felt lighter, as though the weight of tension had been replaced by something far more meaningful: understanding and connection. When the plane landed, and passengers began gathering their belongings, many took a moment to thank Taylor as they passed her seat. "That was incredible," one woman said softly, her eyes brimming with admiration. "You handled that with so much grace." Taylor smiled humbly, shaking her head. "I just tried to show a little kindness," she replied. As the man exited the plane, he paused for a moment at the door and turned back to look at her one last time. Taylor gave him a small, encouraging nod, and he walked away, his posture lighter than when he had boarded. Later, as Taylor stepped into the terminal surrounded by her team, she glanced out at the sea of people bustling through the airport. A quiet smile played on her lips as she reflected on the encounter. It wasn't the first time she'd been misunderstood, and it wouldn't be the last, but in that moment she was reminded of something she had always believed. Even the smallest acts of kindness could change someone's perspective, and sometimes their life. And for the passengers who witnessed it all, the story of what happened on that flight would stay with them, a reminder that grace and compassion have the power to transform even the most unexpected moments.